Good afternoon and welcome to our July 23rd media availability following today's Emergency Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Mary Sturgeon. I'm standing in for Katrin Bowen as our moderator. This afternoon you'll hear some remarks from the Mayor, followed by Interim City Manager Adam Laughlin, and then they'll take your questions. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Deanne DeAndrade and Kevin Culp, our interpreters today, for helping us out. Over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mary. Good afternoon. First of all, I'm grateful that many members of council were able to attend today's Emergency Advisory Committee meeting on short notice. As many of you will have seen and heard, we had a thorough and wide-ranging discussion on face coverings with analysis from our city administration, as well as perspective from the Chief Medical Officer of Health for Edmonton, Dr. Chris Sikora. Now, I'd first like to acknowledge the willingness of my fellow council members, as well as city officials, to be recalled from our summer recess with short notice, but it was the right and responsible thing to do. They all asked many questions that needed to be posed in anticipation of a wide range of scenarios as we continue to navigate the relaunch and now back to school. Given everything, including feedback from the public especially, transit riders as well as patrons of civic facilities and their feedback too, the City of Edmonton is moving to level 2 in the city's decision-making model, mandating the use of face coverings when inside City of Edmonton owned and operated facilities, amenities, attractions, and services, including public transit, and this will be effective August 1st. This decision was not taken lightly, but our administration made it because it will help keep Edmontonians safe from COVID-19, enhance confidence in their city's services, and help ensure our overall economic restart is a success. In particular, this directive will ensure that Edmontonians feel more safe and confident using our public transit system, which is essential to a healthy and robust economic relaunch for our city. Folks who need our transit system don't always have a choice when it comes to using transit. They need it to get to work, and soon students will need it to get to school. And because it's not always possible to physically distance on transit, the responsible choice was to require Edmontonians to wear masks on our transit service. Indeed, the evolving science shows that wearing a mask can help slow the spread and perhaps the intensity of COVID-19 infections. In fact, Alberta Health Services' own recommendation is that Albertans wear non-medical masks in public, especially when it's difficult to maintain physical distancing of 2 meters at all times, which is almost a given on the bus. So Edmontonians have, in addition to that science, given us very clear feedback over the past few weeks through our online survey on masks and face coverings that they would like their city to take action on this issue on their behalf, especially as it relates to transit. The city's survey results say that most Edmontonians are in favor of mandating masks for our transit system. And while our decision today does not include enforcing masks in all spaces, I would say that over the past few weeks I've heard more and more feedback from businesses in particular that would like the city to help normalize or even mandate mask wearing so enforcement isn't landing solely on the shoulders of the business owner. And so that they can help maintain an environment that is less susceptible to COVID-19 outbreaks, which would be devastating to their livelihoods and to their employees. In fact, earlier this month, the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce urged the public to wear masks to help protect jobs, protect workers, and speed our economic recovery. And I completely agree. Wearing a mask helps protect our economy, it helps ensure folks feel safe engaging in the economy, and it does help keep workers safe, public and private sector. To this end, as mayor, I will call an extraordinary meeting of council for next Wednesday to consider a bylaw to mandate face coverings in indoor publicly accessible businesses and retail spaces to be consistent with where we're going with civic facilities and transit, should council adopt the bylaw. We will, of course, hear from many members, we heard today from many members of council a will to proceed even today on this. But city officials need time to draft the bylaw. We understand that that's already in progress, but we need to be able to learn from Calgary and other cities and hear more from business associations and the public to get it as close to right as we can while maintaining focus and appropriate urgency. There are clearly strong and diverse opinions, so it will be a vigorous debate. We heard a little bit of that today. And I don't know if the bylaw to go to phase 3 will pass, but I do encourage Edmontonians to share your views with your councillors. Finally, as important as face coverings clearly are, I'd like to stress that wearing one is not a substitute for practicing other COVID-19 prevention measures such as maintaining physical distancing, staying home when you're sick, and practicing good hand hygiene, especially washing your hands. Masks are just another helpful tool to combat this virus. They protect people from being exposed to your germs and vice versa. Now, I should add that by and large, Edmontonians have been doing an excellent job of practicing and implementing AHS guidelines, and many Edmontonians already wear masks, so this directive won't change their habits much, but it will help ensure the city services people rely on are safer for everybody. The science now clearly says it's the right thing to do for our collective health, and so we're doing it. Better that we act now as a preventative measure to reduce another rise in infections than be forced to react when there's another surge and when we may have to face yet another costly shutdown. Mandating masking in more indoor spaces to help contain this pandemic might be the most important step we can now take to protect our economy, protect each other, and the health of our loved ones, and in turn maintain the very opportunity to stay out and about in our community together. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll go to Adam next, and then happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Mayor noted, today at the Emergency Advisory Committee meeting, we provided information on the decision-making model that is used to guide the decisions for mandatory use of face coverings in indoor public premises and on transit vehicles. The issue of mandating the wearing of face coverings in indoor public premises and on public vehicles has been under review by administration for several weeks now. Our intent today was to provide the Emergency Advisory Committee with an objective and balanced view of an approach that we believe is a good fit for Edmonton. That approach includes the use of a decision-making tool to guide progression of face coverings from voluntary within Edmonton through to mandatory province-wide. Moving from voluntary to mandatory status is a significant change, and we shared with Council the many criteria and indicators we examined to guide our recommendation. We balance evidence-based data from public health authorities with options and preferences of Edmontonians. Our goal in every decision related to relaunch from the pandemic is to ensure that the risk of transmission remains low. Edmonton's pandemic experience has been quite contained with a small and relatively stable rate of new cases and infections per 100,000 population. This data, plus our regular review meetings with Edmonton's own AHS members, ensures that we are responding effectively to outbreaks and changes in our COVID-19 situation. We also track indicators and conditions that guide decisions for moving from voluntary to mandatory levels for wearing face coverings. Over the past 2 months, the city has completed several research studies to obtain opinions and preferences directly from Edmontonians. We have learned that for current and past ETS customers, the use of face masks or coverings is the most critical factor likely for them to return to transit. We also learned that the majority of Edmontonians feel that wearing a mask should be mandatory while visiting any indoor public place. Combining data and feedback from Edmontonians, we concluded that moving from a voluntary to a limited mandatory requirement for wearing face coverings would support our efforts to keep the infection rate low. We recommended, or we advised the committee that mandatory face coverings be used when in Edmonton transit vehicles and inside city-owned and operated facilities, amenities, and attractions and services, and this will take effect August 1st. Some exemptions apply to this direction: children under the age of 2, persons with underlying medical conditions or disabilities that inhibit their ability to wear a face covering, persons unable to place, use, or remove a face covering safely without assistance, persons eating or drinking in public premises that offers food or beverages, persons engaging in athletic or fitness activity, persons caregiving for or accompanying a person with a disability, and persons who have temporarily removed their face coverings to provide or receive a service. Over the coming days, we will be working with regional and local partners as well as with our employees to ensure alignment for an effective implementation. Our approach to enforcement will be similar to many of the initiatives that we've undertaken related to the COVID pandemic, and that's with the closures and the reopenings. We are going to ensure folks are aware. We're going to educate. If we need to, we will warn. Pending the bylaw discussion that happens next week, moving from level 2 to level 3 may mean other enforcement measures that we would need to take. Concludes my comments, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 7 journalists on the phone with us and through Google Meet. First up is Natasha Reid from CBC. Natasha?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'd like to hear this from actually both Adam and the mayor, if possible. I know we talk about it not being punitive, but Adam, you mentioned it being a supportive approach to education and raising awareness. Yet most of us, I think, have observed that 30 to 50% of people on transit anyway are currently wearing masks. What are your ideas for expanding that communication to encourage more people to do this?
Good question, Natasha. That's the work that we're undertaking over the next few days here in terms of our method of communicating and our policy or directive to our employees around enforcement or encouragement and not being punitive. We did review the different bylaws that are in place in different municipalities. We applied a GBA plus lens, and we actually aren't identifying it as masks. We're identifying it as face coverings so that we can ensure that we're giving all folks the option to ensure that they're minimizing the spread in whatever forum is being used, whether it be a medical mask or a scarf. So those are details that we're working through. I mentioned at the EAC meeting that Dr. Sikora actually participated in a video that identified the proper methods to put on your mask and take off your mask. So we'll be using methods like that to educate, and then through our peace officers, our transit drivers, our facility operators, we'll continue to educate patrons on that are using city services. And I think you said you wanted to ask the mayor the same question?
Yeah, and if I could rephrase it, that'd be great.
Go ahead, Natasha.
I think, Mayor Iveson, this might be the first time you're wearing a mask during one of these news conferences, unless I missed one. I guess similar question.
I usually wear one down to the news conference and then take it off when I'm at the podium because we're maintaining distancing. But we, even though the directive doesn't kick in till August 1st, Adam and I decided to lead by example in this regard. And
so I guess I just want to know your thoughts on how much of this will be leading by example going forward to influence or encourage the public to do what you're doing.
I think the city is certainly taking a leadership position with our own services and our own facilities. Many businesses have taken the position too, though they've also complained that it's if it's inconsistent, it's sort of like the old debate where some restaurants were non-smoking and others stayed smoking, and there was a concern that it would be bad for business if there wasn't a level playing field across all businesses. So the city's in a position, you know, we would have made our facilities non-smoking first, I'm sure, though I don't know all the history on that. But there is direction setting through example setting, certainly. But I think the other part of your earlier question that's really important is that this is about reassuring the public that they can have a reasonable expectation of going out in and amongst each other in public spaces, whether it's private retail or whether it's a civic facility like a library, or whether it's on a bus, where they may be in an enclosed space with other people and unable to maintain 2-meter distancing at all times. That they're given the confidence that they're going to be afforded an extra layer of protection from others, and that they in turn will also offer that protection to others themselves. And that is the bargain that most of our community standards bylaws, whether it's about the expectation to mow your lawn or shovel your sidewalk, and we get very good compliance on those when it's normalized and adopted by the community as the standard. And so I think that's what we would be looking to do here, and a sort of heavy-handed enforcement is always a last resort for us in all of our community standards bylaw. They're really community norms, but you need to be able to back them up with enforcement, and you need to be able to say, no, this is a rule in our community in order to normalize it. And people have been strongly urged and strongly encouraged for months now, and we're not at the level that the science would suggest would be beneficial, and that would also give people confidence to come back out into public and use these facilities and services if they have some anxiety about that today.
Natasha, do you have a follow-up?
That's good. Thank you. Thank you for the both of you answering that. I think I'm good. Move on.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks. Next up is Mac Mail from Taproot. Mac, go ahead.
Hi there, thank you. My question is for Mr. Laughlin. Given that the decision to make face coverings on transit mandatory was driven in large part by the need for riders to feel safe and to have the confidence to ride transit, I'm wondering about the decision to not release any information about the operator who recently tested positive. And related to that, will face coverings be mandatory for drivers themselves, and does making them mandatory for transit change anything in terms of your approach to disclosure when someone does test positive?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. Is your question that we're not releasing information related to test results for employees?
For the transit operator that tested positive, yeah, and if transit operators will be required to wear masks, given that it's now mandatory for riders.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the question. As an employer, we protect the privacy of our employees when it comes to their health and their particular private situation. Certainly the measures that we have in place around cleaning and the regular PPE practices that are in place related to that minimize the risk as much as possible, but we do want to protect our employees' confidentiality. As far as the mandatory for the drivers, we're a bit ahead of other transit agencies in that we have shields that are in place now on all the fleet that's currently in operation. And question came up today whether the shields were in all of our fleet, and post-meeting we've confirmed that we have the shields on our entire ETS fleet. And so with that in place, there's actually a barrier between the driver, the operator, and passenger. And so at this point in time, we're not anticipating them wearing a mask. However, I indicated that over the next few days here, we'd be working through the different protocols and procedures and directives that we need to have in place to ensure that our employees are safe, and that will be another one that we'll be reviewing. But at this point in time, I'm anticipating that if there's a shield, the operator doesn't need to wear the mask.
Mac, do you have a follow-up?
Just, I guess, do you think that might impact what the mayor said about leading by example? If people get on transit and they see that the operator isn't wearing a mask, are you concerned about that?
Yeah. That's a good consideration. I think education, awareness can come from visibly wearing the mask, but it can also be from communication. And the question came up today at council around if someone comes on the bus and they don't have a mask, how are we going to handle that? And one of the ways to educate or build awareness is actually to provide a mask. So that's another thing that we're evaluating. in terms of availability and cost and to lead by example. We have, through the masks that have been provided by the province, I believe we've received 2 rounds of 750,000. We have handed those out at transit centers and LRT stations to try and encourage individuals that having the mask on does reduce the risk, and so we'll continue to look at options to lead by example, as the mayor said, but to educate and inform individuals as they're using our services.
Thank you.
Next up is Dustin Cook from Post Media. Dustin, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think this question is for Adam. I'm wondering about supply. What if people do not have face coverings accessible to them? Does the city feel an obligation here to get a supply? You know, there were 750,000 masks handed out on transit. Within 3 days, they were all gone. So how is the city going to meet that demand or feel an obligation to have that supply for residents now?
Great question, Dustin. I think that's something that we need to continue to evaluate. And recall when we were under a state of local emergency, one of our regular measures was the availability of PPE. Personal protective equipment, which includes masks. We haven't stopped monitoring that. And in terms of the availability publicly, we have to evaluate that on an ongoing basis. And I mentioned today that I think we'll see iterations of the application of this, and one of them could be city supplied until there's an awareness that it's a requirement to use the system. Certainly not there yet, but something that we're going to have to continue to assess. And if there is a supply issue, we're going to have to monitor that and ensure that we take the appropriate steps to make sure that we have the appropriate PPE in place to provide the service first and foremost.
Dustin, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, quickly, to the mayor, this is more I guess, regulatory question, but next Wednesday, are you expecting that council will be able to vote on the bylaws presented? And can you talk about your hope for that? Obviously, you are one vote, but you have already said you support moving to level 3. So is that what you're hoping to see done next Wednesday?
It would be possible for council to consider at least 2 readings. It would require unanimous consent from council to consider all 3 based on some of what we've heard. I suspect it might be hard to get unanimous consent to move ahead with all 3 readings in one meeting, so there may need to be some additional steps, but there could very likely be some healthy debate about amendments, exceptions, enforcement approach, supplying masks to folks who don't have them as part of an education, a voluntary compliance measure. I suspect there'll be a robust debate that could lead to perhaps first reading with amendments and referral back for other changes, but conceivably if there was unanimous will to allow third reading to proceed, that can all happen in one meeting. But if there isn't, and there are strongly held views on this certainly, then it may take a couple of steps, and it may take an additional meeting, and it may take a little more time. But that's where I encourage Edmontonians to make themselves known. We've been receiving quite a bit of correspondence on this in the last several days, and I don't think that's going to abate. It's important to have a public debate about this, but also important to give clarity to businesses in particular that have been asking for clarity on this in a timely fashion. So there's a healthy tension in all of that, but at the root of your question, could we consider a bylaw or amend and consider a bylaw on next Wednesday? The answer is yes. How far we'll get with it is up to council.
Thank you, Dustin. In the room, we have Jeremy Thompson from CTV. Jeremy, go ahead.
You'll have to forgive me if this question has already been answered. I've been in and out of the room here, but I believe it's for Adam. Just on the enforcement of this current policy, why go with the awareness and education approach rather than, you know, fines and you know, more harsher penalties?
That's been the approach that we've taken throughout the COVID pandemic, and Edmontonians have responded. Recall when this initially started to hit Edmonton, folks were, you know, too many folks were on the staircase in the River Valley. After a day, it normalized, and that was through education and awareness and warnings. Another example was the skate parks, where we were seeing some use that wasn't consistent with our expectations. We warned, we educated, we closed, and folks responded. So I mean, it came up a fair bit in the discussion that Edmontonians have responded quite well in this pandemic, and I think we need to give them the benefit of the doubt to adapt to these new situations, which is kind of every day we go through a new situation. So that's the reason for the approach. If there is a situation where there is an overt non-compliance or not following the rules, then it could mean removal from the system or the service or the facility. But we need to make sure that we give time for Edmontonians to learn, adapt, and adjust to the new normal.
Jeremy, you're good? All right. I think that concludes our questions for today. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.